what I'm finding with a lot of couples is one person is interested in having more sex than the other. Someone they might have a higher sexual desire than the other person. So you're kind of in between two worlds when you're trying to figure out what works for our marriage or what works for our relationship. And this is why I created this series, because once we do come together and we have a better understanding, and we'll talk about that and part three of the series, and coming together and maybe even scheduling sex, right? Like we're going to talk about that as well, where we're on the same page. This is how many times we're going to have sex a week. We're going to talk about what are the things that's stopping you from having your best sex possible with your spouse or your significant other. And we're going to talk about health and stress and kids and the demands of the world, so many things that comes up against you. We talk about low libido and just different stuff like that that might be blocking you from having your best sexual experience. And in this video, we're going to discuss how do you view sex? This is part one. How do you view sex? This is going to play a huge part into your relationship because too many times we get into relationships or we get married and we don't have this discussion. There might be some shame attached to this. There might be some ignorance attached to this, like you just don't know. Some people might be more experienced than the other person. There's a bunch of different variables that comes into play when we're trying to figure out how do you view sex, because it's all about your vantage point and the way we see things. And when we can get behind each other's eyes and see through the other person's eyes and get a better understanding of the way they view sex, then we can act accordingly and have the best sex possible, because I want you to have the best sex as possible. I want to talk about some of the things that I have researched, which I find interesting. I was looking at an article from the Associated Press, and they says that the first sexual experience for 1 in 16 women was forced or coerced intercourse in their early teens. 1 in 16 women was forced or coerced intercourse in their early teens, and that's from the Associated Press. Now, the thing about that is, when you're in your relationship or in your early stages of your relationship, do you have that conversation with the person you're with? Maybe there was some sexual abuse, and I'm very sensitive to that as well. Have there been some sexual abuse where you feel like you can talk to the person that you're with about your past, about maybe what happened to you, maybe as a child growing up, or maybe a teenager, or even an adult. But these things, I feel like they have to be discussed, because sometimes when they aren't discussed in a relationship, sometimes you can wonder why she might be cold or why she's not really wanting to have sex, or there could be a certain scent or a certain touch that turns her off from wanting to have sex with you, and you never quite understand why, or why she doesn't have the sexual liberation in the bed that she feels she deserves. So some of these things come into play. So if you had that conversation early, you can have a better understanding. And I understand that everyone don't deserve to know your history or what you've been through. So this is kind of more of someone you're getting into a committed relationship with, or you plan on getting married. So I think that's the conversation worth having. And I also believe that even with men, maybe men who have been sexually abused, do you have the conversation with her as well? Do you tell her that you've been through some sexual abuse as a kid or as a teenager? So you got to have these conversations, because when you do, that's how you can have your views on sex kind of align. So that way you both have this understanding, and you're willing to be more patient, and you're willing to be a little more sensitive to their needs, because it might be a process if you've been through that. In most cases, women's first sexual experience is with someone else. A man's first sexual experience is through masturbation. Again, this plays back into how do you view sex. So as a man, or as a younger boy, preteen, you might have seen some porn online, or you got into masturbation at an early age. So you know what it takes to please yourself. Very few women get the opportunity to know what it's like to please themselves because there might be a certain amount of shame attached to uh, masturbation and learning your body, learning what that feels like for you to have your own sexual experience with you so you know what you like, because a lot of women don't have the luxury to experience their own body. Um, it's usually through someone else before they get to learn what it takes to please them. So it's easier for a man to learn his body because a lot of times, it's easier for the man to get to climax opposed to a woman. So for her to be able to get her orgasm, it might have it takes a little time, especially as women. When women get a little older, having an orgasm a lot of times have to do with what goes on outside of the bedroom before what goes on inside the bedroom. So you can work your way up to that and have a good healthy relationship outside of the bedroom. So when it's time to have sex, she have a easier time with orgasm because she trusts you, because she love you, because she can relax knowing that you have her best interest, or this won't be forced, and you want to make sure that she get hers, so it's easier for her to orgasm. So that's the conversation worth having if you're willing to please her first. Because as men, we usually don't think about pleasing her first. We're usually more concerned about getting ours, especially at a younger age, and we've been masturbating, and we're just more concerned about what we can get out of it opposed to making sure that she's taken care of too. So women, they a lot of times they don't get that experience of learning their own body first. As I said, 1 in 16 women was forced or coerced into intercourse in their early teens. Now, how do you view sex from a religious standpoint? Are you a Christian? Like, what do you believe in? That different thing, because a lot of times that can play into sex as well, because you could be a Christian and you grow up in the church and they're telling you that sex is bad, or you wait for marriage to have sex, these different viewpoints from a Christian perspective. So is sex bad? So if you're looking at sex as being a bad thing only to save it for your spouse, you kind of wondering like, so what is this whole thing about sex? It's like it's bad just to save it for my spouse. So you can have conflicting messages with that. On the other end, you might have not grown up in a religious home. You might have been taught um, being sexually liberated, where you have sex with whoever you feel like you want to have sex with, and then you kind of learn yourself through sexual experiences. So those could be two opposing viewpoints that if they aren't addressed, again, it can cause problems in the bedroom. So you got to understand each other's viewpoint when it comes to that. And I believe once you have that conversation, then we can start to work on, this is how we can have the best sex ever, because I understand where she come from, I understand where he come from. And sometimes that can even work with therapy. Maybe you need to have an intimacy coach, someone who can help you understand their background and where they come from, because when we're not on the same page sexually, it goes into the bedroom, and then we're not pleased, and then it goes outside of the bedroom as well. You become sexually frustrated, and then you're not able to really give your significant other or your spouse your best version of you, because you're so frustrated, or you're pent up anger because you're not having sex and you're not understanding each other. It's having this miscommunication. And this is why I'm doing this 3-part video series. And before this video end, I want to talk about respecting each other and the way they see sex. Can you respect the way they see it? Because if they're not a big fan of having sex, can you understand why? And this goes back to early childhood, different things that might have happened to them. And then do they trust you sexually? These kind of different things, because they might have had bad experiences. So if you discuss these things and you respect where they're coming from and you're patient with them, I believe you can have the best sex ever. Because when you have the better understanding, Then that way you get behind their eyes. It's this empathy thing that you can see behind each other's eyes and say, I'm going to take my time and make sure that I help you get to where you need to be. So that way we can be sexually secure within our relationship. So I wanted to cover that in part one. And how do you view sex? So remember, when we having these conversations, it's best that this be a safe place for each other and to respect each other in the way they see sex. Because when you do see each other and you do respect each other, then that way I believe you have a little more comfort within the bedroom. Thanks for watching this in part one. I'm looking forward to talking to you in part two of We're Not Making Love No More.